Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Hello, I'm Tony Bell, President and CEO of Phoenix Consulting Co., and I am also proud to serve as the CMC board member of trustees. We are so very grateful to today's forum sponsors, The Ohio State University, and our host, The Ellis. We are so grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness. I don't know why I always want to do the namaste, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch. Well, every CMC forum takes a village. Hi, villagers. Hi, villagers. Let's thank everyone for supporting today's program. Big round of applause. You know, while Victoria has secrets, we have no secret in Central Ohio that women face unique barriers in the creation and accumulation of personal wealth. The cost of the disparity is enormous. Think about compound interest over a person's lifetime, and I think about Lilly Ledbetter and the Lilly Ledbetter Act. But anyway, the Federal Reserve estimated that closing gender and racial wealth gaps could have increased Ohio's GDP by, drumroll, $67 billion with a B between 2015 and 2019. Wow. I don't know if I want to clutch my pearl. Well, I can't. Nobody has pearls. We can't clutch them because they've all been clutched. So yeah, despite the impact women have had on Central Ohio's economy, and it's huge because not only do we work, we give birth to the other workers who sometimes don't want to pay us as much when they grow up and we don't like them. There's been little disregarded research to inform critical policies developments, but that, my friends, is about to change. Hold on, change is coming. With today's incredible panelists, we'll dig into why it's especially challenging for Central Ohio women to accelerate their wealth creation and what we will do to change that. Please welcome today's amazing, stupendous, wanting to empower us all panelists. Courtney Falato, Vice President and Program, feel free to clap every time you want. Yeah, clap all the time. Vice President and Program Officer, Global Philanthropy for JPMorgan Chase & Co. Hannah Halbert, Executive Director for Policy Matters Ohio, because that's why she's going to change those policies. Kimberly Miner, amazing designer and President and CEO of the Women of Color Retail Alliance. Lillian Morales-Laster, Executive Director of the Empowering Latinas Leadership Academy, also known as ELLA. And our host, I'm going to fangirl over here, our host, Kelley Griesmer, President and CEO of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. Kelley, welcome back to CMC. We look forward to today's forum, and the mic is all yours.
Well, hello. Let's see if I can get this mic right. This is my favorite thing, to be in a room that looks like this. It is my place when I see this many people who identify as women looking back at me, thinking about how we can create the change, be the change, but you have an assignment. And that is, the next time we do this, bring one of the people who identify as male with you. And when you go back to your places, talk to them about this conversation. Because our mission is the collective power and passion of all people working together. And what we know is we will not create the systemic change we want without everyone. So I love this room because we are the power, but bring the army, okay? So with that said, I'm very excited about talking with these amazing partners of ours at the Women's Fund about wealth creation and the research that helps with wealth creation. Because we all like to talk about women. It feels good to talk about women and people who identify as women doing more, doing better, not living in poverty. But what we don't have are the tools to make that happen. We know the policies that we would like to enact. We know the rules and the guidelines we would like to see happening in our workplaces and in our state and in our families. But we have nothing to support our arguments. So what do we need to do? That means we need research. And everybody gets scared, right? Oh no, this is hard. I'm going back to college. It's not hard. This is the math. And the maths really easily when we get it on paper, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna, obviously I could go all day, but but what I want to, this is a pillar of the Women's Fund's work that people don't often think about, and I know our amazing founder, Mary Lazarus, is watching on live stream, so wherever she is, because of her and the other 14 founders of the Women's Fund, research has always been one of the 3 pillars of our work, because we knew we could invest in better grant making, more impactful grant making, and do better advocacy efforts in the community if we had the math, the research. But research is both quantitative and qualitative, because women's lived experiences, all those stories you have, matter. So talk, say it out loud. And now our great panelists are going to say it out loud. So welcome, friends. All of you have been super helpful to the Women's Fund over the years as grantees and partners and funders. So I'm on this topic of data, right, and research. How does your role, what you're doing and your job as a decision maker, how do you get more impactful when you have meaningful data about women's lived experiences? Courtney, you want to start?
Sure. First off, thank you so much, Kelley. I'm so excited to be here with this panel. I'm going to be sliding into some DMs later because I got some questions, Hannah. So yeah, that's a great question. So I'm Courtney Falato. I work at JPMorgan, and I lead our philanthropic work covering 2 states in Ohio and Kentucky. When it comes to philanthropy, there are a lot of different approaches. I like to always refer to the spread the peanut butter approach, right? Give a little everywhere, right? But that's not really about impact. That's about giving a little everywhere and just showing up. That's a strategy. It works for some. In our role at JPMorgan, we think about our grant making and really focus on inclusive economic growth for all. And to do that, we really want to start with identifying the problem. So one of the most important things that I lean on, which is why Hannah's going to get a couple questions later in an email, is data. To understand the problem, you have to look at the data, both the numbers and the words. Huge qualitative researcher over here. So in order for philanthropy to really have our dollars matter, we have to understand what is the problem we're trying to solve, or else it's macro and in a wall, right? So I think in my role, that's how I'm leveraging research every day.
Well, I appreciate the little shout out. I'll just say for everyone in the room, we are Policy Matters Ohio. We have all kinds of data about all kinds of things, and you're all welcome to contact us. We'll do our best to get back to you, but we love to talk about our work. So if you see something coming out on our website or have a question, feel free to call that researcher up and ask them about it. We love briefings and all of that good stuff. So hopefully we can be a community resource to all of you. And then data, that is where we try to live at Policy Matters. And, we know, and I say know intentionally because it's not just a belief, we know that when we design policies with the specific intention to benefit, maybe not just there's lots of words that benefit mean, but we mean financially, economically benefit Black women, that works for everyone. And so if we don't have data on what's going on with Black women, if we don't have Black women represented in our organization, in our leadership, if we don't have Black women in forums like this, we're going to make policy that is ineffective, that does not actually do the thing it's supposed to do. So that's one of the core things that we try to do at Policy Matters. Dr. Pruitt is in the room if you want to check out her report on Black Women Can Thrive, and it's in Ohio. So there's something very core to what we do with women and race and data. But it also, me as I'm the director of Policy Matters, I have to make decisions about pay scales and benefits and things like that. And having an understanding of what that looks like in our community helps me make equitable decisions in that, so that we can really live by those values as well to bring folks in and up in our own organization.
So there is no storytelling without data. I come from the for-profit side. I was in retail. I'm with retail now, but I was in retail, and I couldn't make a business decision without data. And so when I came into this role last September, I think two of the first people I reached out to were Kelley and Courtney, asking for help in getting research done on the women in the group that we wanted to help, because anecdotally, we understood what the issue was. I had spent 30 years in this industry. I knew what the issues were, but until I could prove those issues to be true with data, my story didn't matter. And it's the difference between it's nice to do and we must do it. We can't close the gaps if we can't identify the gaps and the root causes for the gaps, so that we can come up with the solutions to make a difference. And so without data, it's a fairy tale.
Hello. Yeah, I agree with empowering, with EYA. We serve Latinas here in Central Ohio, and one of our issues is obtaining reliable data. We provide programming, support, based on our community's lived experience, based on what we've experienced personally, the stories that we've been told. But then when we go to ask for the funding for these programs, the question is, well, why? And I can tell them all the stories. I don't have the data the reliable data that's based here in Central Ohio for Latinas for something specific. We can get national data. That's always available. But that's one of the core issues that we face as a nonprofit organization, is trying to figure out, how do we collect that data? How do we get to our core groups that need this programming? So.
Can I?
Something?
Yeah, sure.
When we talk about data, yes, there's McKinsey, Lean In, all of these organizations out there. Every year there's a report, but they live at the surface. And you don't make a difference at the surface. You have to be at the intersections. And that's the data that we're talking about that we cannot find. And if we're trying to get it, here's the other barrier to it. It costs a lot of money. And we're nonprofits, right? We're trying to change the world. And unless we have the funding, a small report is couple $100,000. And so we need the partnerships to raise the money to get the data that we really need to make a difference. So I just wanted to clarify, when we say data, for anyone out there saying, oh, there's all these reports, I see them all the time. They are there, but it's not the information that we need.
And can I just jump in there too, as we talk about data? One point I want to make, which we've all said in some way, is the difference between the qualitative and the quantitative. And in the seat I sit in, and as I think about it, and something that I've heard a lot more in the last couple of years, is this idea of lived experiences. That's what we're calling qualitative data as we think about solving problems for people. And I will say, I think that piece has not been as valued until recently. And it brings the numbers alive. I think about the Action for Children report as we continue to hear this groundswell in this community around childcare and the importance of childcare. And as Eric knows, huge fan of the work, read the numbers. This is how many children don't have access. This is how many parents and families don't have access. Those numbers are important, but what's really important is that lived experience voice to wrap around that narrative, to bring that alive. So as we think about policy making, historically, and I do work for a bank, and some of my bankers are here. We love numbers, but the numbers come alive when we add the words. And so one of the really exciting things I'm excited to talk more about today is how we can better lift up the lived experiences as we continue to both identify and solve problems in our community.
All right, well, see, and I could let you guys go all day, but I'll give you a new topic. well, as we were thinking about this question, for me, gender equity is a moral thing, right? I wake up every day and it's something that I deeply, deeply believe in. I understand for everyone it's not that yet. So I believe there's a business case, and we can at least make that business case. And my colleague was writing the question, and we were talking about what does Central Ohio lose by not uncovering this data, by not making women visible. But she then quickly reframed it to, what does Central Ohio gain, right? Because I believe, for all of you, the simple part, we're leaving money on the table, right? There are just hundreds of, thousands, millions of women at the intersections that don't have the wealth that would do that, make us that $67 billion in increased GDP at least, right? Because that number's getting older by the minute. So talk about that. What does Central Ohio gain when we uncover this quantitative and qualitative data?
I think, and you have all the data, so I'm gonna let you jump in, but one of the things that I really think is important as I think about it, what do we gain? We gain, when we talk about women and wealth, we have to talk about economic inclusivity. We talk about numbers. We talk about the fact that here in Central Ohio, I think it's something like of the households that are counted as families, 40% are single parent households. We know the majority of those are single mothers, and we know the impact of wealth building on a single mother, right? We also know that it is women who are investing in their communities and breaking cycles of poverty, right? So it's this we're not necessarily gonna talk about women and wealth, we're gonna talk about economic growth. We're not gonna talk about childcare, we're gonna talk about infrastructure. Childcare is an essential piece of infrastructure for a booming economy. Intel can be built, all of those suppliers can be built. There's not enough childcare. Childcare is infrastructure. So as I, from a funder's perspective, and really start thinking about, where do we invest our dollars and how do we invest our dollars and how do we make that case internally, we're making the case about the economy because that's really what it's all about.
And just quickly on that, we, the big we, like all of us, as Ohioans or just people living on the planet, there's going to be some extraordinary challenges coming up in the form of climate change. We see the continuation of sort of the pulling apart politically in the nation. We got some big problems, and continuing on a policy path or an economic path that leaves so many people, women, Black women in particular, just off of the playing field, we can't confront those problems. We need all of the brains, the experiences, the stories to pull together to confront what's headed our way. These are going to be critically large problems, and we can't afford not to figure this out, how to build an inclusive economy. And just on this GDP question, there was once a time that working people were able to capture an equivalent share, like as the GDP rose, so did wages for working people. They were on the same track, essentially. That was broken. That was broken back in like 79, early 80s, right? And so there's an additional question of how do we expand and recapture and build this GDP here by including women, but how do we make sure that the working people who are creating that wealth are also capturing their share? Because a lot of those workers are women. And so I think we got to think about fairness in our economy. We got to think about worker bargaining power in our economy. We haven't really addressed what our employment floor looks like in a very long time. And until we start looking at those things, until we start saying, we can call it modernizing or whatever we need to call it, but until we get the basics down, we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle, we're going to leave people out, and we're not going to be ready to face the future.
I mean, it's hard to follow. I mean, so many points have been made, but we also need to consider, we can talk about what we gain, and it's obvious it's an economic situation, but we gain the future. If we aren't focused on it now, then we are victimizing the future and our future, and by victimizing our future, we are no longer able to compete And so what does that mean, for Central Ohio or the United States, or as we go forward, right? We're very egocentric if we're thinking right now is the issue. It's really about the future. And, and then what do I can't say what we would gain without really kind of talking about what we lose. The longer that we are in this state that Hannah just clearly identified, and the longer that we take opportunity from women, because women are the nurturers of the universe, so when we're taking opportunities from them and they can't give back, we're creating this, I think it becomes unsurmountable emotional tax that we carry as women, and then we hand down to the next generations. And every generation should become stronger. But if you don't have the tools and you don't have the support and the understanding, then we are just going backwards and creating our own apocalypse. I know it sounds crazy, but if we're not moving forward, where are we going? And what is the fear that gets in the way for us to do what's right, not just, we talk about DEI, and now everyone's afraid to say equity, everyone's modifying their practices, and without these practices, women are the first line, right? And so then, it's women, then it's women of color, and then it's, it goes into how do you identify. Every intersection is affected by this fear, and I'm not going to call out who has the fear, but it's an incredible fear that would prevent us from, right, it's an incredible fear that would prevent us from building the strongest future that we could possibly have.
Ditto. For this for Latinas specifically, I could talk about it. We're still dead last in pay equity. We made it come up, and then COVID happened, and then because Latinas are the majority workers in low wages, we ended up being last again. One of our goals with EYA is to ensure that there are spaces where Latinas can continue to thrive here in Central Ohio, bring their talents, their treasures, and diversify the workplace, and have their voices heard at tables. It's especially hard when the funding or the salaries don't match their skills, their talent. We're losing amazing talent, women of color, to other cities who are going to pay them what they're worth for everything that they can bring to the table. That's what we're losing by not ensuring that we have the data, how we can, ensure that we're empowering the women in the room. So in addition to all of that, I'll stop.
Go ahead, Kimberly.
So just to frame up some of what we're talking about, and I don't know the specific numbers for just Central Ohio, but if we just use this as a point of reference. So I am, with the Women of Color Retail Alliance, but Retail Alliance is not just the stores you shop in. As identified or defined by the National Retail Federation, it is any industry that touches a consumer experience. So there are 52 million jobs in the United States that are part of that ecosystem. It's the largest independent employer in the United States is retail. And it incorporates banking, CPG, logistics, it's huge. Women are 60% of that workforce. They're 37% of the leadership. Women of color, Latina, Black, Indigenous, Asian, South Asian, anything but white, combined are 6% of the 37%. It is all economic. Because if you're not part of the leadership and you're on the path and you can't get there, what happens? And here's where it breaks down. And I know this to be true because we are women of color, so we're often looking for where are our Latina sisters? Where is everyone who we can help, right? But you can't find them because once you get in that job that you're qualified for because you got the job. And if you're a woman of color, you're double qualified or you wouldn't be in the room. And so you get in the room And at that first opportunity for promotion, there are 100 men that get promoted. Black and white, whatever, 100 men. 91 white women get promoted. 89 Asian women get promoted. 64 Latinas get promoted. And 52 black women get promoted. So do we see how the data changes the story? Right? That's why you can't find us, because we get cut off at the first opportunity to advance. And that's why this information and this data at the intersections is so critical to the work that we're all trying to do.
Yeah. So I know we're getting close to our time already, and Lillian, so I'm going to give you a minute to rest because I'm going to start with you this time. But the one thing I was going to say is, like, if you think about it, what if we hadn't sent those women to the Olympics? We'd have a whole lot less gold medals. So let's think about that. But for this question, think about other countries. Think of Mexico just elected a female president because years ago they centered women in their policies about representation. And the article I read said by the time she came up for election, it wasn't even a question, gender. This is Mexico, where we often like to think is very different, and yet the United States grapples with this equity in our representation. So how, and in childcare, and in paid leave, and in all those things that other countries, quite frankly, all of them, almost than us, as the famous quote goes that I say all the time, other countries have social safety nets, the United States have women. And that's not my quote, that's a sociologist quote, but it's true. So they've centered women. Lillian, how do we center the women you know? What would you recommend, and then all of you, how do we center women with this data in the circles you see? What steps do you think we can take?
That's a good question. I think it starts with us. I am very fortunate that in my day job, I'm an HR director, and I have the autonomy to advocate and teach the people around me to look at things holistically. I think, and depending on who you are and where you're at, you're very linear when it comes to jobs. You're very linear when it comes to hiring. And for those of you who are in spaces who can hire, who can advocate, who can recommend women, it's about teaching the people around you why looking at things holistically, like childcare, transportation, language, medical, just healthcare, all of that. I think it starts with us. Especially in this room, we're very fortunate that we are in the positions that we're in. So I think it's one person at a time. I think, without getting into politics, I think we can only control what we can control. And I think teaching the people around us, advocating, and being okay making people uncomfortable with, uncomfortable. I love it. I am so... I am so happy that I am in the position that I am, because I ask why. Why, when you start pushing and start asking, why do you think this? Why do you do that? Why is this person not? And you start asking people to justify their decisions, you open the table to have conversations and realize people don't really have good reasons for the things that they do. And then that's your opportunity to educate them as to why they should consider something different. And then, with my nonprofit, I get to be invited in spaces like this to tell people there are nonprofits who are doing the work that some corporate offices and organizations can't do. So support the nonprofit work, support us in time, talent, treasure, so we can continue to do the work that we do.
So I completely agree that it starts with us. I might go in a slightly different direction, is that it starts with us, and women need to get out of their own way. Mm-hmm. Right? And stop voting against your own interests.
Yep.
It's time. Stop being afraid, right? Because if we don't stand up for each other, who's standing up for us, right? And it's hard work. And, you know, you might not agree on everything, but there has to be something you can agree on that would be important enough that you could put the power in another woman's hand and trust her that if you put the power in her hand, she's going to grab another woman and keep us moving. So I would go down that path. And, you know, I know we're at the end, but I can't emphasize that enough. We all, so often, we are so afraid of whatever. We live in this space of fear, and we're afraid to step out and say, that's a woman, and I'm going to support her because she's a woman. And whatever gaps she has, I'm going to stand in them so that she can learn to do better, to be better, to make a difference.
Final thoughts, Hannah?
Yeah, ditto. I'm borrowing one, but y'all kind of, yeah. What else is there? For us, it's going to be policy, and you know, why not here? Like, why haven't we seen faster progress, like greater leadership? Why are we still having to do this level of advocacy just to get childcare back on the table? Not even to fix it, like to get it back in the headlines.
After a pandemic.
You know, it's really, yeah, it's a very good question. And I think back to what Kimberly was saying about fear, and what was said about making folks uncomfortable. And for those who are in a position of privilege, whatever that might be in your universe, to really look at that and see, what is my role? What can I do? How can I push this forward? And then I do think that there is something in terms of the institution building that we should all think a little bit about, or that I'm going to continue thinking about after I leave this space, because I think that's that's a piece that is now growing. I think because of institutions like the Women's Fund, we are getting there. We have some of the components, the puzzle pieces, to start building that institutional infrastructure that can confront some of the institutions that maybe need to be challenged or dismantled. Until we get a handle on that and get a clear, unambiguous right to our own bodies, though I think those are going to be some foundation pieces we should get clarity on.
Yes, all of that. And I think of three words, so if I can sum it up. I think of data-driven, targeted, and inclusive. Data-driven, qualitative, quantitative. We need to continue to understand the numbers, but continue to bring in the lived experiences and allow those with the lived experiences to be at the tables, the decision-making tables, not a mere focus group. Targeted, when it comes to our economic development approaches, we have to target populations that we want to see change. So whether it is targeting women, entrepreneurs, and ensuring that they have the technical assistance and access to capital they need to start and grow their business, or whether it's creating career pathway pipelines that have barrier reduction tactics for women to ensure that they have access to the high growth sectors in our community. And then lastly, inclusive policy making. And we know, and if you don't know the policies, go to their website. They got a whole list of them. But the ones that are front and center for my mind that we really need to focus on, equal pay, childcare, and healthcare. If we look at those three, I mean, there's a whole host, but those are three foundational ones that if we really want to change the trajectory, not just for women, but for families, communities, and economies, those are three great places to start.
All right, I'm going to give you all a second. I'm going to ask you one sort of lightning round question right after this, but before that, I'm going to give my statement to our audience. This is your chance to participate. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. We're going to move to those questions from our live stream and this in-person audience in just a few minutes. So if you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone where Doug is waving. If you're joining us online, please type your questions into the chat. Before we take audience questions, though, I have one more question for my esteemed panelists. And this, again, since it's a little bit of a lightning round and it's not technically on our script, but I know you all can answer this. When we talk about wealth, what's the number one for women? What do you think wealth means? What is it? Is it a yacht? What is it? Because, so Lillian, you're already nodding, so do you have something, a thought?
I think when I think about wealth, I think about legacy. Growing up in a house where my mother didn't work, my grandma didn't work, I was the first one to actually get a job. I want to build a legacy, and it's not even about generational wealth, it's just a foundation for my children to be able to build on.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. That's what wealth is to me.
Okay.
What can I leave for my children? Can I teach them something so that they can have a better life than I had? I mean, I feel like my parents did a pretty good job. So what can I do to build on that?
For me, I think it represents freedom, as freedom to choose, to get out of a dangerous or bad situation, or one you're just ready to be done with. Freedom to pick your, where you go, what you do, how you spend your day. The freedom to choose and have and build and create the life of your dream. And that's something we all should have. That should be our baseline. We are in the richest society, I think, maybe ever on earth. Like, there's so much money. Like, we can do better than this for folks.
Bringing in my lived experience, I've been a single mother for most of my parenting life. When I think about wealth, I think about taking a breath, right? I think about safety, security, freedom, legacy. I think about how fortunate I am, as hard as it has been for me and my unit, but how much harder it is for so many, and how hard we work on behalf of our kids and our community. And wealth building allows us to take a break.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like the American dream to me. So before I hand it over to Doug, I just want to put in one little plug, and that's that what they just did, talk about what wealth is to them. The Women's Fund has a StoryCorps project right now. We can give you the link. We need all of you to go on. It's a recording. It's not a video. It is an audio recording. And every single one of you, if you go on there and talk about what wealth means to you, it adds to our qualitative research for the work that we're doing right now for a report that will be issued at the beginning of 2025. But we need those stories. So call us, email us, text us. We'll send you the link, but we need you to go on there and record your stories. So with that, Doug, I'm going to hand it over to, I know he's curating our questions, so I'll let you take it from here.
Kelley, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. Please do join us here at the microphone. If you have a question, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you're watching on the chat, please enter your question online. We'll try to get to those as well. Great questions at CMC have two things in common, don't they? They take 30 seconds to ask or less, and they end in what punctuation mark? A question mark. Thank you, our repeat guests. First question. A Pew Research poll done last year stated that 68% of Democrats say a major factor in wage differences is that employers treat women differently. Only 30% of Republicans in the poll believed this, with many Republicans saying these differences are about the employment choices that women make. What do you make of these different beliefs? What does the data say?
That's a good one.
Knock this one out of the park.
The
Go.
data say, it's those women picking those different jobs like lady attorney and lady surgeon and lady journalist and PhD that's causing the wage gap. Here's something we know. We know that when women are disproportionately in a sector, so in an employment sector, it's going to be devalued. And it's not because that work isn't valued, it's because who is doing that job. And we see that with race and gender and any of the places that the structures that we live in can create that division and devaluation. So it's just not borne out whenever you get into the data and see. And I do think that we hear a lot about, well, women just need to learn to negotiate. And it's like, well, what is wrong with this system that requires a special way that only seems like white men with a certain economic background are able to negotiate properly. And so maybe we need to evaluate as employers, and I'm speaking as an employer here too, like I got to look at this stuff for myself. Like, how are we valuing talent and leadership, and what does leadership look like? And so there's a lot of ways that we can, on an individual level, start to unpack some of that. But in the big scheme of things, unfortunately, it is this larger economic problem of where you find disproportionate shares of women, disproportionate shares of women of color. Those occupations have been undervalued from the jump. If we look at tipped wages and why we even have tipped wages, that story is embedded in all of that. And so it's the big picture we got to confront and deal with, and that's through policy change.
Hi, I'm Kat Glenn Applegate from Action for Children. Thanks for the call out earlier, and thanks more importantly for the call out to the importance of quality and accessible childcare. We are on the cusp of releasing our annual child care provider survey, and we'll be releasing the results in a couple of months. And I wanted to know what advice you have for data sources like this and other data sources that can reach beyond the choir. So it's not just the folks that are interested and care about it, but how do we share that data to a broader audience?
First off, Kat, I think we're supposed to meet, so nice to see you. I think I'm in your email box or you're in mine. That's a really great question. It's something that we are trying to figure out, right, to get the reports off the shelf and actually into action. One of the things that you'll be hearing about in a couple weeks, and Charlie, don't worry, I won't spill it, there's a thing that's going to be announced. And really, as we look at some of these big problems within our community that require collaboration, they require us to identify problems in new and novel ways, bring different people and different voices and lived experience to the table. As we look to solve some of these major issues, we have to start not thinking of them as silos. So for instance, let's talk about workforce for a minute. When you talk about a workforce system and you look at the most recent Brookings Metro Monitor report, Google it, 2024, Columbus, highly prosperous market, but the lowest out of the 54 markets when it came to racial inclusivity. So we're booming, prosperity is not shared, right? So, one of the things that we have to keep in mind as we go and do things like look at our workforce system and how it can be better, we have to also look at some of those barriers that are large barriers to certain swaths of the population and ensure that they are baked in, that they are part of the conversation, not something solved separate. Childcare is not just early childhood education. Childcare is infrastructure. Childcare is a true generational workforce issue, the workforce of today, the workforce of tomorrow. So, as all of these reports do come out, I think what's really exciting about childcare is that it is being talked about by the business community now more than ever. It's a bipartisan issue, which is wild in this market, but awesome. So I think it is about making sure that some of these issues are part of the problem identification and solution iteration earlier on, which is about networking, connection, and partnership.
And I will just quickly add is, we're kind of in, this is an assumption, but this may be the choir here. And I keep going back to this idea of making and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I think there's some element of that, of like if you're learning and experience and thinking about these things is sharing it with folks, advocating. And, we have a state budget coming up in the winter of next year. This is the opportunity to get money for these things that you care about. And so if you're not familiar with the state budget process, if you haven't experienced a legislative session or advocacy, check out our website. We have some primers on there, but that's where the game's going to happen. And I think getting comfortable using data and using stories and then showing up to where the policymakers are with that, that's where that's one place change can happen.
I say that the power of three, too. So when you have your data, there are 3 key points that can grab a person's attention, right? And if you can talk to those 3 points, then you can give them the bigger report, You've grabbed their attention. And I like to find the 3 things that are going to make people gasp, right? Like, I gave you 3 facts. Everybody in this room was like, what? That's a recommendation for anyone who is sharing data and wants a response from it. What are the 3 things that are going to grab someone's attention so that they want to know more, and they can do something with the information you're sharing?
Hi, my name is Brian Thomas. I'm a small business consultant, and working with women, I absolutely know that they have a superpower to GSD. But I noticed that there is not a lot of men in this room. So how can we, as men and as advocates, bring that future closer to close that divide and close that gap, both quantitatively and qualitatively?
I'm just going to, I know I'm not actually on the panel, but you have got to say it out loud everywhere you go. I am in rooms every day where I know that there are people who identify as male sitting around the table with me, and they all want to say the same thing that I do, but they wait for me to say it. You have to say it with us, and first sometimes. So it's, you know, I'm very passionate about that because it sounds different coming from you than me. They expect it from me. It's better from sometimes a different person than me. So others? Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. And show up. Like, next time you come, bring 3 of your friends.
Thank you. Priya J, watching on the live stream, asks, could the panelists please speak to how we shift data collection to be inclusive and disaggregated so that findings are appropriate for diverse people, maybe more broadly than wealth and economics?
Yes. Excellent. We have to actually make those demands. So a lot of the data collection is happening through the Department of Labor, the census, these big federal institutions, and we have to say, put it on the table. Do we have to do legislation? What do we got to do to get this expanded? And you know, in our State of Working Ohio report, it's going to be out over Labor Day weekend, we have this big disclaimer in there about what's not in there that we just can't get. And one of the pieces is good data on the LGBTQIA experience in the workplace. And part of the reason why that doesn't exist is because a lot of people are still not safe in disclosing their identity at work. There's been some improvement in just being out at work, but not to HR or management. And so some of this is a question of safety and privacy. We saw that in what happened last legislative session around data collection of trans people in Ohio. Where is it data collection, or are we building some sort of creepy list, state legislature? And so there's a lot of questions that we got to deal with, but it's time to start dealing with them. You know, we try to get good data on Ohio for AAPI populations, and getting that disaggregated, the stories. It is a different world within that big chunk of data, and you have to combine so many years to be able to tell that story because the populations here are so small that you lose so much. And so at some point, there has to be a disaggregation, yes, and also getting beyond just having data as the proof point. I think that was mentioned as well. Like, people's stories and what we learn qualitatively and what communities report is also incredibly important to making the right calls on a lot of these things.
And I just want to add, as a recovering researcher here, as we think about disaggregating data, a lot of times the disaggregation that is truly needed comes when the rooms full of researchers are inclusive and diverse in nature, right? So this goes back to ensuring that as we're identifying problems and creating solutions, we are not just focus grouping those with the lived experiences, but having them in the decision-making, even on the design aspects, because how you collect the data then limits how you can crunch the data. So ensuring that as part of the research, and as funders, we have that power to say, I'm going to give you a grant for $250,000, and I want you to disaggregate it by A, B, C, and D, and oh, by the way, that's my first thought. But as you get in there and talk to people, see if there are any other metrics or ways of analysis that'll be important as we try to get to this issue.
More of that, please. It's the funding
I didn't just give
community.
you a grant, by the way. That was just hypothetical.
I know, I'm like, okay, and where do we start?
Hi, my name is Leah Dooley. I'm just going to speak for myself today. I have a slightly related question. The data geek in me loves all these questions about what are we going to do with the data? Can we diversify it? I love that organizations are really glomming on to the idea that people are interested in data. We want to know what percentage of your organization, how long are people staying, what percentage are male, female, what percentage is diverse. But I'm interested in your thoughts on how we can push them to give us a little bit more information, because I'm noticing that oftentimes they'll say, we're 43% of color. That's great. But what you're not telling me is that they're all at the bottom. So how do we push them to give us that more of that data? Like, where are they? How many people are actually moving within your organization? How long are people staying? Because I think that's really critical, and that actually gets us to that wage gap. Are you actually investing in your people? Are you investing more in the women or more in the men? And then one last thought that I had is, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to change that budget question so that when we're talking about the economies, we really need to be talking about only having living wages. And if you guys are working for an agency that is more than 80 people and you're offering a job that is not a living wage, we need to be asking HR why. Why are we offering that? Because that is offering just welfare for companies.
So that's a lot of questions. Anybody want to tackle a piece of that?
Well, I think to your first question about how can we push, there are a lot of, it's probably going to change now because practices are changing as a result of ESG focus changing. But a lot of companies have their ESG reports, and you can look it up, and it's real clear if you read between the lines and the details where their women might be and where they're at the intersections of gender but a lot of it doesn't exist because they don't want it to exist. So you can push, but they're not recording it because they don't want you to know what they don't really care about. And there are some companies here, I won't name them, but if you ride on Morse Road, you'll know. And they talk about all the awards that they're winning because they're the most diverse and they've done all these things, the best place to work, but all of their diversity is in the distribution center, right? And so you as a consumer also, when you see those facts, reach out. Ask them, oh, well, who works for you? Push the envelope. And when you find out that they aren't the company you want them to be, or it doesn't align with your values, do something about it. Stop shopping it. Buy your candle somewhere else. Like, do things that make a difference.
Like my honeysuckle candle. So real quick, I want to just add to the first question real quick. I also think as a funder, this is something that was really, I think, lifted up and a bright light was shown post-pandemic. Less than 1% of philanthropic dollars go to organizations led by individuals of color, and less than 0.5% of that 1% go to by organizations led by women of color. Foundations have the ability, as you do your grant making and as you go into community, to ask these questions of organizations, and not to do it in a way that is like, oh, you're not diverse at all, like, we're not going to give you money, or yeah, you're perfectly diverse, we're going to give you some money. It's about engaging in conversation with your grantees about where you're at and where you think you're going. Are you representative of the community that you're trying to serve? How are you creating pathways to prosperity? It's what you fund, it's your programming. How do you do it internally? So I know JPMorgan, part of our grant application, which is long and onerous, I'll say that. However, we do ask questions about the demographic makeup of leadership. And it's not to say yes or no, it's to understand where you're at and to inform us so we can engage in more conversations with organizations that are critical to change in community. So collect more data, but then use it.
All right, well, I so wish we had more time. So come next time, too. But I'm getting wrap up, so we're going to turn it back over to Tony Bell for concluding remarks. Tony, it's all yours.
Well, hey, everyone, I hope that you found today's community conversation a clarion call to change the trajectory for women, because closing this gap for women means closing the gaps for all of us. And that data takes us from nice to do to must do. We must tell our stories because data, qualitative and quantitative data, tells our stories. We've got to tell our stories. And we mustn't tire because we're tired of having to prove it all the time. We are better together. Thank you to today's forum sponsors, the Ohio State University, the Ellis, and thank you to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's live stream. Let's give a special round of applause to our recovering researchers, our data people, Courtney Falato, Hannah Halbert, Kimberly Minor, Lillian Morales-Lester, and a wonderful, wonderful thank you to our host, Kelley Griesmer. Please register now to join us next week right here at the Ellis. Our next forum is called Restoring Civility to Public Institutions. I'll say it again, Restoring Civility to Public Institutions. Make sure we show up in rooms that everyone's in. And we're going to feature next week 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 former Ohio Attorneys General. So it sounds like that forum is happening just in the nick of time. I wonder how that happened. Thank you again, everyone. We could not do this without you. And next time we have a forum like this, you know to bring 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 people who identify as male. Thank you again. See you next week.